Tamron used to be a name that I would associate with low quality glass. That is not the case anymore. Today we shoot some cyclocross using the Tamron 28-75 for Sony E-mount. Let's get into it. Hey, it's Brock from Conversing and Stuff, and today we're going to talk about the Tamron 28-75 2.8 for Sony. I upgraded from my Canon M50 that I'm recording on right now to a Sony A7 III. I'm not going to go into too much detail with the general use of the Tamron lens, but what I can say is that I found it overall excellent. This review is going to be focused around sport shooting. And while a 28-75 obviously isn't the optimal shooting length for sports, I thought let's give it a try and see how it works. All these photos were shot last weekend at a local cyclocross race. They were shot on a Sony A7 III in manual or aperture mode, raw files, continuous focus in wide mode. One of the things that I did want to show right off the bat though is something that comes up quite often, and it's the quality of the Sony color science. So here is a raw file shot directly out of the camera, no changes done on it at all, including exposure, contrast, or anything like that. And so this gives you an idea of what the colors look like out of the camera. And while I did some shooting on the M50 as well, I find that the Canon I prefer, but if I'm not comparing them side by side, I really don't notice a difference. So I really haven't had an issue overall with the Sony color science. I was quite surprised and thought the Tamron 28-75 did a great job in general shooting the cyclists. I shot in a bunch of different locations and angles, having them both come at me kind of as they were going around a corner. And with that focal length, you need to get really close, and it gets a little bit tricky because by the time the people get close enough to fill up the frame, then you're really close. So it's a bit trickier than a 70-200, which I would have preferred. It was a little bit tricky shooting this day. I had really forgotten how dark it gets, even with full sun under a tree canopy. And I think a lot of these photos would have turned out better if I would have shot them today, because I learned so much that I had forgotten when it comes to the lower light, the shutter versus ISO. And also I was a bit paranoid with shooting the Sony for the first time in lower light. This camera is so much better than anything that I shot before. It took me a while to get comfortable with pushing those ISOs high enough so that I could really freeze the image. With the 28-75, you really need to wait till somebody's really close in order to fill up the frame. And I was noticing with around 160 to 250 shutter speed, I was actually starting to pivot the camera and follow them because they were so close when I was ready to release the shutter, that I was introducing just a slight amount of motion blur. I was able to remedy this by finding a location where they were coming more directly at me and I wouldn't have to pivot, and it just eliminated some of those soft focus. All in all, I was really happy with how the lens produced, and I really can't wait to shoot some native Sony glass. I'm gonna rent a 70-200. I want to rent a fixed 300 if they have one, because I bet it would just be awesome. One of the issues that I had specifically with the A7 is I find, and this might just be a personal thing, but I find the screen very hard to tell whether or not a shot is going to be tack sharp or even slightly blurry. It just seems deceptive to me. Typically, even on this Canon M50, I can look at the screen and tell pretty much right away whether it's going to be in focus or not. For whatever reason, on the Sony, it just makes it a lot more difficult to tell whether it's sharp or not. So what did this setup do awesome? I mean, for a third-party lens that's a third of the cost of the Sony competitors, I think it did awesome. The colors looked great, the focusing was really great, and I just couldn't be more impressed with it. The other thing that was super awesome about the Sony camera is having the ability to programming an Aps-C button. It really helped me be able to zoom in times where I wanted to get a tighter shot. It's just it's super nice to be able to just switch back and forth, especially when you're shooting sports and you need to get tight and you don't want to spend the extra time to do the editing of cropping and post. The other thing that really impressed me was I was able to hand my Sony A7 with this Tamron lens off to my fiance, who's essentially never shot a DSLR or a mirrorless camera, and she was able to get some great shots. The autofocusing is just, has it down to a science. You know, I told her to just try and film the frame as much as possible, and she got some phenomenal images. And 10 to 15 years ago, even sooner than that, the cameras, you never could have got the quality of just handing it over to somebody like that. So in aperture mode, just handed it over and said, have fun, and it was just, the results were amazing. I think the other thing that I realized too is that going into this event, I really had an idea of what I wanted to get out of it. In fact, most of what I was going to do was shoot video. I wanted to put together a video, test the slow motion, the camera, and things like that. And I had a full set list kind of together of what I was going to do. You know, setting the scene, shooting some of the riders warming up, you know, get some in the social areas where the people were drinking beers. And I got so focused on just snapping the pictures because the kind of different heats kept going, you know, one after the other, that I missed a lot of stuff. So what I'm going to do next time is I'm going to put together my shot list. I'm going to take a picture of it, and so I'll have that on the camera so I can, you know, and force myself to, you know, use the preview, bounce back to that, and see what I have and what I haven't had completed there. So that was my experience with the Tamron 28-75 and the Sony A7iii shooting cycling. And in short, I can say I continue to be impressed by this camera. I continue to be impressed by this lens. I think it's just an awesome setup. So thanks for watching. Please subscribe to support the channel, and in the comments below, let me know what Sony lenses you've shot sports with and what your experiences have been. I'm really curious to compare this third-party Tamron to some of the Sony glass, even though it costs a lot more money. So thanks for watching, everybody.